Well, greetings, and thank you everyone for joining us here today. And thank you especially for joining the Triton Leaders Conference. We're so glad that you have taken the time out of your very busy schedules to be here with us. And also want to encourage you guys to sign up, make sure that you go to the hub and sign up for any other of the workshops. My name is Tammy T. Blevins. I am the Associate Director for the Faculty and Staff Giving Program. I've been on campus for over 16 years now, and I have served on the Black Staff Association for 8 years. With 2 of those years, I served as the chair from 2019 through 2021. I currently serve as the vice chair for the Ujima Network, which we're newly kicking off across campus. Now, at this time, it is my pleasure to specifically thank you for joining us for this presentation, which is the keys to allyship, understanding what an ally is and the role allies play in a diverse society. It's my pleasure to present to you our speaker, Dr. Mica Pollock. Dr. Pollock is a professor of education studies and the director of the Center for Research on Educational Equity, Assessment and Teaching Excellence, which is called CREATE, here at UC San Diego. Dr. Pollock's work explores the educator's key role in daily efforts for anti-racism and equality. She pinpoints the key roles of the language in educators' work. Her newest effort is Us versus Hate, an educator and youth-led anti-hate messaging project, which she designed with her partners across San Diego. After an exciting national challenge hosted by Teaching Tolerance of the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2019 and 20, Us versus Hate is continuing to build nationally out of the UC San Diego CREATE and Mica's national group School Talking in partnership with the National Writing Project. And without any further ado, I present to others and introduce to some Dr. Mica Pollock.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Wonderful. I also want to just introduce Emily and Shanoa, who are EDS doctoral students new to the Us versus Hate project and leading it with me. And I'm going to invite you both, Emily and Shanoa, to grab questions from the chat and engage even more with me today. So I want to sort of flag that this session is, I don't see this as Allyship 101 or me telling anybody how to be an ally, but really an hour together to question the term, how it feels to us, how it resonates for us, what we mean by it. It's actually a term, I've spent 24 hours talking to friends and all kinds of folks deep in the work of anti-racism that I respect very deeply about how they use the term, whether they use the term, its pros and cons and tensions. So I want to be in that spirit of questioning as we roll forward today. And also then want to spend a bunch of time engaging you in this project, Us versus Hate. We've now had closer to 11,000 students across the country participate in various forms. It's an anti-hate messaging project about lifting student voice to speak up against hate itself and for one another and for themselves. And it has a strong theme of allyship throughout it, even while the term ally is one that I continue to think with and haven't always applied to what I do in the world of K-12 anti-racism. So I thought I would just start here with this question. A chat waterfall just means we think for a moment and then we all put our take in the chat at the same time. So here's a theme from one of the sort of anchor texts, mentor texts for today. And defining allyship or commenting on it. And I just want to ask you, think for 1 second, what resonates with you about this word ally? And also, what unsettles or confuses you about it? So think about that for 1 minute or 30 seconds. And then I'm going to put us all in the chat at the same time and we'll grab a few. What resonates with you? You can start typing if you want before you post it. About the word ally. What unsettles you or confuses you about that word? We're going to do some of these engagements as we go. So let's just do it. Chat waterfall. What do you think? Okay, we got one. Waterfall is supposed to mean tons of water flowing through the chat. All right, here we go. Okay, great.
They're coming, they're coming.
Chat life. Okay, so we have, I'm just going to go through and mention some that resonate with me, and maybe Emily and Shanoa as Us versus Hate co-participants. If you want to grab some that resonate with you, that sounds good. We have a few more quotes in the slides to come of other people's take, my friends and family, in fact, that I've been asking. So somebody says it unsettles me. It feels like something you can decide to rescind. I feel like a lot of people I've been talking to lately about the term have that same concern about it. Is it something temporary? Is it something rescindable, something optional? The word all in the word, I mean, it's the word ally, you know, it's a deep wisdom in there. The word all is packed into the word ally. It's kind of inherently beautiful word, the idea of alliance. Can it mean what's on this second quote on the slide? All of us need to be allies to support the liberation of us all. Does it mean that some of us stand up for others of us? Should it mean that? It resonates with some of you. Everybody to feel equal versus I don't feel like I'm an activist. So how active is the work of being an ally? What kind of work does being an ally entail? Shanoa, you want to unmute for 1 second, say what you mean here by your point?
Yeah, so like if you think about two nations who are allies, one nation doesn't get to just decide that they're an ally of another nation. So for example, you don't give yourself the title of a queer ally, as just one example. And then also the other thing is I think a lot of people think that being an ally means you're helping a certain community, but allyships are mutually beneficial. It's a two-way street, not something you honor somebody with or deign to give. But I also really enjoyed what Billy said in the chat about it being a verb. It's an action.
Cool. Thank you, Shanoa. So the idea of one of the folks I asked who spent his whole life being a professor who works on whiteness and anti-racism also said, I think ally, it also said, interestingly, I don't really use the word. I was fumbling and trying to define it in a presentation I had to give lately and said, I think it's a word people give to you and not one you anoint yourself with. Which is something Shanoa just said. Mutual benefit, I think, is a really interesting point to raise. Some folks I've been talking to have said that maybe an ally should not be about benefiting self, but I think you're onto something really important about mutual benefit as opposed to one-way giving to others, or certainly any sense of charity or more fraught dynamics of giving. Friendship, support, a verb. Okay, so we have lots of other great points. Subjective, continuously being defined, and maybe not in our full control to define, super important. So lots of great ideas here. When will it be the norm as opposed to a starting place or something people have to be urged or trained to do? Pretty great questions here. Let's go to the next slide and we'll
Mica,
have more of a chance.
Mica,
yes,
Mica,
Tammy, yeah.
On. Sure, there's one that there was a concern that was posted. How do I know I am doing the best I can to be an ally?
What a great question. I mean, I thanks for lifting it up. I think everybody I've been talking to grappling with the word ally grapples with it in the spirit of ongoing learning and trying and never in fact being done, but also continuous listening and learning and feedback, as opposed to the dynamic of marching in certain that what I am doing is the right way. And so some of our quotes here, I think, get to that very point. I'm curious which one of these, if any of them, you resonate with. Just take a minute to look at them. This is 4 friends of mine that I respect deeply, doing the work along various lines, many particularly embedded in anti-racism, some embedded in community organizing among various group lines. alliances in their lives of many kinds. Which of these resonates with you? Grab one and put in the chat. If any, resonate with you. Anyone? I have reactions because I always have reactions. Any of these resonate with you? These are questions. We have first, the theme we were just on, listening and learning versus sort of marching in. So the orientation to learning from a community, and particularly if one is purporting to be an ally to a community, supporting leadership in that community seems to be important. Number 3, I don't want to put you on the spot, Billy, but do you want to say why number 3 resonates with you? Feel free to unmute if you want to.
Yeah, so for me, it's the bolded text. Sounds like taking action because it benefits you without really suffering any consequences. And that's like a space where I've worked quite a bit. Like I was a social worker by trade for many years. And, you know, I think it was very easy to say, like, I'm an ally to these various communities that I worked with, but I never had to go through the same struggles that they did. So I felt a lot of tension in that. And something that you said a little earlier, I thought was something I resonate with quite a bit, where it's like, I don't feel like I can anoint that title onto myself because that feels pretentious. And instead, that's a title given to me by those communities.
Right, sort of an honor if given, but not a self-anointment. I think that's a really important dynamic. The first point you were saying, resonating with the idea of sort of, not having to suffer any consequences. I was, in thinking about this in the last day or two in preparation for this, I realized that there's something about the word ally that for me, even while it's beautiful and an honor if ever called an ally, there's something about it that to me has always felt like slightly passive, like I will stand next to you supportively while you deal with this, instead of somehow I will really take on labor to make sure more people don't have to deal with this, or together we will produce a better society. There's something about it that might lean toward passivity. And sometimes I've wondered whether it put the term, as a white person, myself, puts a lot of attention on white people instead of lots of people standing up for lots of people in their own communities as well. So other points that resonate with folks here, let's just see here. Thanks for all of those participating. And Shanoa or Emily, maybe you can help me find people. I'm able to see the chat right now and I'm looking at some slides, so it's a little harder for me to look at hands raised. So this question, the bare minimum, Michelle, do you want to say anything about that? Maybe you're resonating with what I was saying, almost slightly passive, or a cheerleader while you handle that. Or there are other folks?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I feel like that definitely resonates with me. It's like, I might be thinking about how I want to be helping others, but it's more of it's like the first step kind of a concept. Like I want to be an ally, I want to help others, but what am I supposed to be doing is kind of like, I think that's the issue for me. Like as a community, what are we doing? Because really, I mean, on my own, I can talk to other people, but like, what are we actively doing to change?
So the point of active doing toward change as part of a community, rather than the individual ally trying to, personally solve. Emily, can you mention or comment more on your point in the chat here?
It's also something that Shanoa mentioned, is this idea that we are not also bound up in liberation, that we aren't also working towards this. We all need to free ourselves from white supremacy. It is not something that we are lending ourselves to. As a white person, I'm not lending myself to another's cause. I am mutually invested in this. This is something that's a part of my life as well. And I think making that shift toward, we're all part of this. This is something we all need to be doing. And this is something that can liberate everyone. Something I think about.
I think there's something about that in the term for me too, Emily, in that for me, Anti-racism has always been about, or I've always seen it as benefiting all of humanity, and pursues equity to benefit the entire region, for example. When K-12 teachers do more anti-racism, they are producing, developing the full human talents of young people for our entire society. So this question of collective liberation is I think that there's also something of a tension to it, because that idea of doing things out of self-interest is a very fraught, complicated concept. So it's both and, I think. And so we have a lot of great points in the chat. Let's look at a couple more examples. If we go to the next slide, from folks who have been struggling with the term and how it works. The next slide, Suzanne, if you can advance. There we go. Thanks for doing that for me. This is someone who uses the term a lot and actually said I could name them. Friend Allie Michael, who does a lot of professional development on issues of race, particularly on issues of whiteness, and uses the term ally. Maybe prefers that notes that there are alternatives, co-conspirator, accomplice, framing here in terms of particularly white alliance or anti-racism. The language doesn't really work until we're following the leadership of people of color. And staying conscious of these power dynamics seems to be a theme, so that, back to, I think, Billy's point about, allyship or anti-racism, say, is something we dip our toe into temporarily, but could always just leave. That's a very complicated power dynamic that needs to be wrestled with at all times. This point that Allie says about white allies, another take on, we might consider today, who's an ally to whom? Tammy and I were talking about this before in preparation for this session. The term ally, does it allow for all of these different forms of alliance in, say, anti-racism or equity effort or LGBTQ support, various forms? So here, raising a totally different angle on this, white allies who support one another and hold each other accountable. And this interesting point of not being let off the hook, an ally who actually supports and challenges another white person. Final take in the next slide. More efforts to sort of wrestle. This was the professor who was worked on anti-racism forever and found themselves struggling with the term. It may be slightly generational. Do we not mention or imagine an ally as like a state of anointment, back to somebody's point, that one reaches, or a term that we apply to self? What about the term solidarity? Is that different from ally? Is being a comrade different from ally? And overall, is it maybe that we just need lots of definitions of the work, and do we sometimes oversimplify what we're doing? And then finally, the last slide, I will send you to my cousin, Ben Gilbarg, who I asked about this, who has had a very long, lifelong commitment to anti-racism, raised by my aunt, who's a community organizer, always in very diverse friend and family configurations, and I remember that he had made a video, particularly in June 2020, as movement for Black lives and protests really growing, crucial protests around the country, saying, be an ally. And this was his definition of what allyship is about. And for him, to me, when I think about principled allyship, which is what I talked to his mom, my aunt, about, issues of how active you are, how urgent. If you watch this video on YouTube, it's very urgent. It's not performative, which is an issue we haven't raised yet. Serious, long haul versus one-off. So some of the dynamics, let's keep thinking about allyship as we get into some concrete examples of efforts to do the work. So if you go to the next slide, these are just some examples of my own work in the space, particularly anti-racism, K-12 work with teachers and students, lots of professional development tools. Everyday Anti-Racism is filled with short essays asking folks to think about the role of race in their work and racism. School Talk takes the frame of equity, another professional development tool. There is a picture here of a piece in Ed Week back in the spring that had that quote in yellow in it. And here, I'll put that in the chat. So if you want to check it out and read it, you can. But it has this orientation to what Emily was saying. Anti-racism, I was standing up in the piece for anti-racism because it's been very attacked lately. If you've been looking at the news with this sort of endless caricaturing of anti-racist or DEI efforts under the caricatured term, in this case, critical race theory, caricaturing both critical race theory itself as scholarship and actual K-12 teaching and professional development. But this idea, this piece then is standing up for anti-racism itself and saying it's not a zero-sum game kind of, it's been caricatured as anti-white effort. And I try to say in the piece that anti-racism is a collective investment in the human us, that sort of big investment in a better society through standing up against harm to folks other than oneself as being harmful to our society. And it's that way of framing anti-racism that has always resonated with me, and perhaps why I haven't always grappled with the label ally as much as I can going forward. I come from a family of Holocaust survivors. Working on race and racism has always been in my heart since I was a child as the US version of that same phenomenon of naming types of people as somehow inferior and harming them because of that, and building, in our case in the US, an entire society around false ideas of differential human value. And so that was kind of an obvious thing to fight against since I was a kid. And I remember going to my first job interview, and somebody said to me, as an first academic job interview, and somebody said, "Why do you work on race?" And I said, "What?" At the time, in fact, I had never been asked that question, because for me, racism has never been a people of color problem. It has white people, the idea of whiteness, the idea, as Emily said, of white supremacy, a type of person who is inherently more valuable and should have more stuff and privileges. The idea of whiteness has been core to race and racism from the beginning. So to me, anti-racism is something everybody should be working on, and something that in doing benefits our entire society. So that's sort of my orientation, and I bake that into equity work with CREATE, equity work with teachers, anti-racist work, and this new project, Us versus Hate, as something anti-hate work, and in that sense, alliance for every community, as if all communities are equally valuable. That's something all of us, an orientation, almost an ethical orientation, that all of us should have. Next slide. This idea of ally, and we're getting now into Us versus Hate a little more, really resonates with me. The idea of an ally versus a bystander. This is a lesson from Welcoming Schools, and I will put this link in the chat so you can have it. We have loads of lessons on usversushate.org. This is one of them, and we hosted a professional development series this year that featured different organizations, and Welcoming Schools was one of them. And this particular lesson is super powerful and super simple. And it asks young people, I think it can be done, I've seen it done with teachers, with adults, will you stand by or will you speak up in different situations? And that basic orientation to refusing passivity, I think, is crucial to the idea of allyship, or the idea of not being a passive bystander. So one activity in this demo that they did in the professional development experience, for example, was to say, super simple example. You're on the playground because you're in K-12. And someone says, that math test was so gay. Classic homophobic statement in School After School in the United States. Which of these responses do you choose? Can you see them? We have ignore the situation or walk away. Intervene myself. Seek help from a caring adult. Talk with the person in private. Anybody want to choose one? This is, in essence, what this lesson does. It asks you to take a scenario and choose a response. Anybody want to choose one and put it in the chat? Are we the student or the educator? Great question. Let's make you let's see. Let's make you a fellow student. You are going back in time. We have one talk with the person in private. We have an intervener. I'd like to think that I would intervene in the moment. Talk in private, intervene myself. I think that honesty, Tara, do you want to comment on that? I think you'd like to think you would. I hear a but in there. You want to say anything about that?
Yeah, sure. So when I was at UC San Diego, I was volunteering at a high school, and in a similar interaction like this occurred in a class where one student told another student that he's so gay. And I did end up intervening in that moment, but I had a lot of thoughts about what would my host teacher think? What was the training that was provided? What am I supposed to do in that situation? And so I think my gut reaction was the correct reaction, but I then had all of these second thoughts about what is the university's expectations of me? What is the school's expectations of me? Especially because I was working with a host teacher that wasn't the most inclusive person himself.
Okay. So you'd like to think, one of the interesting things that Michelle, the trainer here, said, which really got me thinking in leading us through this activity, was other than the yellow one, ignore the situation and be passive, in a sense, be a bystander and let it roll, that the other ones aren't necessarily better than one another. I'm an intervener. And I think, like you though, Tara, I would like to think I would stand up right then and there. But one of the questions she raised was, if one is trying to be super effective, might there be moments when talking with the person in private might be an important way to go? Might there be, if you're a child, a moment when pulling in an adult might be a crucial piece of the puzzle? Anybody want to discuss what your talk in private choice? Giselle, I see you there, and I know you. Can I put you on the spot?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. Why did you say talk in private?
Because I think that, to me, it's really important not to just, I feel that if I were to say something immediately there, it might, I don't know if it's that effective, because then I think if that person said that comment, I would want to take them separate and really have a solid, good conversation to let them learn. And from my perspective, it would probably be a very long conversation. You gotta say, where does this begin? And look, maybe all your friends say this, but that doesn't mean you should say it, because if we continue acting like this is, more of a learning situation. I think it's needed. But you're right, it's important to also immediately maybe address it, because then the rest of the group can see that, well, what this person's doing is wrong. I should be mindful when me myself have also said that, because I can see when my son was in middle school, I would hear their friends talk like that. These comments just coming without them even, I think, even knowing what they were really doing. So I think it just takes that extra step, but you're right. At the same time, it's important to say, but I'm thinking if I were to say something immediately there, it might make the person, I don't know, maybe shy in front of the others and then not want to have that conversation with me later on. So just depends on the situation. Sorry.
So thank you, Giselle. And we see some people agreeing with you on sort of maybe deeper results with the one-on-one, the ability to have a longer term conversation. Someone points out it is situational. Personal safety is raised. I think another important dynamic. Emily, you want to say? Cindy's and Joe's raised hand. Thank you. I can't see him. Emily, can you facilitate that?
Yes, of course. I just thought I would also, I don't know if Cindy, you put your hand down, but I just wanted to lift that up just in case you wanted to discuss.
Yes, sorry. Thank you. I was actually going to just pretty much echo what people have been putting into the chat, that and for people that are in here that know me, obviously probably confrontation would be my original go-to. I'm trying to change myself on that and be a little bit more cognizant that some people could feel attacked, and that is not always the best interest, especially in a very public setting, but at least to address it at that time so that the individual knows that they are supported, and that the individual being attacked is supported, and that there are people that have their back in that situation. And so definitely address it, but maybe taking that person aside can be the best solution.
So Cindy, you're also raising the idea, in part what we were talking about back with discussing the word ally at all, the sort of long haul work of intervening, that there may be the moment that if one says nothing, that not only is the person being victimized feel that there are no allies or supporters, but also other people watching might get the sense that that's totally fine to say. At the same time, maybe the long haul work is that really hard, deeper conversation with the person who said that, and maybe in sense, the less performative version, the more long haul version. Let me actually slog through talking to you one-to-one. Anybody who wanted to say that the seeking help from the caring adult version?
And while they're thinking on that, Mica, Joe has his hand up.
Thank you so much. Joe, go for it.
Yes, I've taught cultural anthropology for a number of years at the community college level, and I would use a video about Daryl Davis, who as a Black man would go to Ku Klux Klan rallies. And he did not seek, when he talks about it, he did not go to seek to change anybody, but he listened to them. And as a result, he got about 12 people to give up their Klan robes. And then I would stop the video and I asked my students, okay, this is what he did to combat racism. What would you do? It's a very difficult situation. The example, the context you gave us is the easy one. The one that Daryl Davis is at the other end of the spectrum, the hard one. And there's so many different contexts within the situations that really require us to be sensitive to the moment that what would likely be effective.
Okay, so seeking deep effectiveness. I'm hearing also in your example, almost, what different positions and the abilities they may afford us to take to enter different kinds of conversations. I think Tara puts a really important additional point in the chat here about who are we prioritizing when we choose response A versus B versus C, with the person being harmed being the core priority. And it seems like that's something to think about in allyship. I think another thing to think about is that all of these responses together are needed. So the idea of collective response rather than passivity. And the norm in lots and lots and lots of K-12 schools, after school, after school, after school, is passivity. Let that harmful comment go and be said and victimize people over and over and over, and not, in fact, be an ally and be a bystander instead. So welcoming schools as an organization that tries to seed in schools across the country inclusive lessons on all dimensions, all of the aspects of K-12 work that need to be done to lay the groundwork for young people to treat one another as equally valuable and to be allies for one another rather than bystanders to moments of exclusion and harm. And Us versus Hate, if you go to the next slide, is trying to be in this space. It's trying to shift school climates through a particular mechanism, which is inviting young people themselves to stand up publicly against hate, for one another, for themselves, for all people as equally valuable through what we've called anti-hate messaging. So we're going to see a video real quick. Suzanne's going to click this link for us to see some youth voices from across the country.
A wave of very explicit bigotry, racism, and all isms kind of erupting across the country, particularly on our school campuses.
So I was super excited to hear about the project Us versus Hate.
That's when I discovered Us versus Hate, and just knowing that it existed and that it was here was inspiring for me.
For over 240 years, our country has been known as the land of the free, and for the same amount of time, our country has struggled fulfilling that promise.
The Us versus Hate project has been one of the most challenging yet rewarding experiences in my academic career.
They don't know about the lasting pain in the land that is free, in the land that is safe, in the land that's supposed to protect you from hate.
A place for younger people to really broadcast their voices.
I've never seen a more diverse and dynamic panel of hard workers.
The opportunity that it provides students to express themselves through creative expression.
Spoken word pieces, original art pieces, acrylic, digital, original songs.
Respect and love one another. This is me saying keep the love and forget the hate. Now it's time to recreate. We all have feelings.
And the right to express them regardless of gender. I am Chinese. I scream, yes, I know Kung Fu, yes, I play the piano, yes, I'm good at math, lie. I am suffocated by my own lies. I just want to fit somewhere, even if it's in a manipulative mind.
Doing something like a girl.
Girl is not a put down, it's an identity.
That's so gay. Gay is not a put down, it's an identity.
I think that people get treated differently just because of the color of their skin. We are the generation that can do this. We are the ones that can save this country.
So you might be asking yourselves, why Us versus Hate?
I created a way for my students to not only show their learning, but spread a message they believe in.
Absolutely, they're ready for the conversation, and a lot of them are really eager for the conversation. A lot of them need the conversation.
It is action driven. It gives our students, if not answers, it gives them a platform. It gives them a voice.
So just the students lifting up their voices, I think, is the most exciting thing for me as a teacher.
The work that they design and the work that they create from their own imagination and their own experience is really spectacular.
Us versus
Us versus Us versus
Us versus
Us versus
Us versus Hate.
Cool. Thank you. We can go back to the slide. If you go to the next one, see a few of these messages close up. That video, by the way, was made by my son, who was 15. Tammy wanted me to share that, so I am. But reactions in the chat. What resonates with you about these messages? What was on your mind as you watched that video? And what are you thinking right now about allyship? I'll give you a minute. These are some close-ups of some of the youth-made messages that floated across the screen by a high schooler in San Diego, just going from left to right, a high schooler now in Washington State, a fourth grader, we've got your back. Some of these were, actually a number of these are from our early days in San Diego. It's now a national scope. What are your reactions as we've been thinking about allyship and we have a project of maybe attempting to seed it? Hope in younger generations from Michelle. The power of words to be upstander. Schools being a powerful way to spread messages. Young brains choosing peace. The message behind me was made by a 4th grade classroom in Alabama. Calling out stereotypes directly and bravely. So what I want to stress about Us versus Hate, I want to sort of show us, because we really only have 15 more minutes, I want to make sure we have enough time to dialogue as we would like to. But to point out some things about allyship or alliance or upstanding that are baked into this project and sort of come up when we look at different messages made by young people. One thing I want to say is, again, that passivity is often the norm in K-12 schools. So the act of asking young people to actively lift their voices against hate, bias, and injustice is more unusual than it should be. And asking young people to do it creatively is more unusual than it should be. This project grew after the 2016 election and a documented spike in incidents of harassment and hate crime on campuses across the country. And we really felt in San Diego, working with a number of teachers, that youth had not been asked to speak against that context. And so Us versus Hate was born with this very simple invitation to speak up against what we called hate, the act of treating anybody as if their identity makes them an inferior kind of person. And so oftentimes in K-12 schools, like we said, not only are all those playground comments tolerated very passively, but if we ask young people to speak up, it's against something more generic, maybe bullying, maybe being kind. And so this effort to invite young people to speak up against all the isms, to actively say all people are equally valuable, is what's different about Us versus Hate. We ask people to submit messages in any medium. We ask young people who participate to vote on them. We pick winners, and then we often make them and send them back to participating communities to shift school climates. So being Mexican isn't a crime, for example, was on the wall for, and still is, for years at my own kids' middle school in San Diego Unified. And there were many kids who looked at it who were not themselves Mexican. The young person who made it defines herself as Mexican American and speaking up for her own community. What is your take in terms of alliance and allyship with young people speaking up for themselves versus standing up for others? Are both of those alliance, or is only one of those alliance? Anybody want to comment? And I want to check out Shanoa and Emily. Maybe you can help me with the wonderful stuff happening in the chat while I was sharing some examples. Is it allyship to say being Mexican isn't a crime in an Us versus Hate message? Or we are not confused by a young person in the LGBTQ community? Is that allyship, or is that something different? What do you think? Let's see here. A door for others to become allies. A model, I'm seeing David's take above, a model for speaking out against harmful rhetoric and behaviors that may then bring next alliances from others, like you also say, Michelle. Does We've Got Your Back, which was made by a 4th grader who considers herself white, feel more like allyship than being Mexican isn't a crime? What do you think? There's no right answer here. What do you think? We're in a conference on alliance. Shanoa, can you say something about that? Clear statements of fact. I'm kind of with you. Humanity is bigger than borders, to me, feels like a statement of fact, right? It doesn't to some viewers. What were you going to say, Shanoa? Can you say something about your point?
Yeah, just the question of the being Mexican isn't a crime sign being created by a young person who identifies as Mexican. And then, you asked the question of, can you be an ally, or are you an ally for making that sign? Right. And so I don't have answers in this question, but I just have additional point to think of, like, how are you possibly not an ally to communities you're a part of? Or is it possible to not be an ally to a community that you are part of? So thinking about some of the work we have to do with internalized oppressive thoughts and how we perpetuate them.
Really important point to put on the table. And Tammy, I remember you wanted to put that point on the table too. We tend to think about allyship as group A standing up for group B or having the back of group B, but are there real dynamics of the need for allyship inside communities as well? And that passivity, for example, as many people of Mexican heritage in our community have been and were particularly being targeted for all kinds of harms and denigration right after the last election, for example. If one was passive about that inside one's own community, is that failing to be an ally? Other thoughts about being conflicted about this? I just lost that. Do you want to say anything? Oh, it's Michelle again, who already contributed. Do you want to say anything about your conflictedness, Michelle? I don't want to put you on the spot. We can let you just.
Yeah, well, I was just saying that, it emphasizes that they're different, that the ally is different from the group being allied with. And I think it is important to recognize that they feel like the other, but at the same time, it's challenging. I'm conflicted because it's like, well, I also want everybody to feel equal. But I think that is a first step in terms of, making this less of a problem in the future, is recognizing that there is the sense of the other. So that's my.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. I know I keep putting you on the spot. And I want to lift up the idea of first step too. These messages are, some of them so powerful and such crystallized versions of, I suppose one could say, allyship. We've got your back. I mean, there were a lot of anti-Muslim hate crimes happening, and a young fourth grader saying, we've got your back. In the term we suggests maybe that the we is not Muslim, but it's very complicated and very crystallized sentiment. But at the same time, a first step in dealing with Islamophobia or anti-Muslim racism, to make a message publicly and stick it on a wall, or make it a sticker that goes on a water bottle. Deep alliance, as we have been talking about, may require ongoing, lifelong efforts that go beyond this kind of first step of saying publicly that humanity is bigger than borders, or walls won't divide us, to actually keep going in ensuring immigrant human rights, for example. So first steps for many young people, but to me, really, really important steps, primarily because they're so rarely made in K-12 schools, and how important it is to lift voices with these crucial sentiments. Go ahead.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So I think it's really important too that when we're talking about allies and we're thinking about that, to understand that we are not all equal. So there are times where you have to know and understand that as an ally, the rest of the counterpart, that whomever it is that you're supporting in that moment, is not equal. They're fighting for equality. They're fighting for equity. And so you have to approach the situation knowing and understanding that you're not equal, and that you have something that you can provide because you're an ally, because you're separate, because you're different, and you can bring power to that movement. So we can't always look at it and say, oh, we're all equal, because that's not the truth. If we were all equal and if we all had equity, we wouldn't be having this fight.
For sure. Absolutely. And I think that key perspective is sort of baked into various examples of Us versus Hate youth participation. We see, for example, this one, Not Guilty, that we have a lot of messages in Us versus Hate where young people who are not themselves Black are lifting their voices against anti-Black racism and police brutality specifically. And what are the power dynamics in that? All the dynamics we talked about at the beginning of how to participate and lift one's voice without leading or speaking for, or certainly, quieting the voices of those on whose behalf one is speaking, deep dynamics. And so just I want to underscore what Tammy just said about this issue of alliance and lifting, in a sense, abilities to speak, but being very conscious of the power dynamics in doing so. And maybe a last thing I'll say on this slide is that even as Us versus Hate invites youth themselves to use their power in lifting their voices, sometimes adults in schools can either support that alliance effort or squash it. And so we're at a moment where a lot of adults across the country are sort of getting more active in trying to shut down youth learning or speaking or projects on related to race, diversity, equity, and inclusion, et cetera. So it's a moment where the rest of us as adults need to also leverage our power in supporting young people in their ability to learn on these issues in schools. And I have been working on that in a lot of my other life in trying to study some of this pushback across the country. And I'm with Tara 100% here. The school leaders right now who are saying calmly and insisting that schools should be places where young people can debate issues and discuss issues of immigration, of police brutality, of women's rights, that they should be able to do activities like the Welcoming Schools Ally or Bystander lesson, that they should be able to pursue LGBTQ inclusion, discuss pronouns, talk about Islamophobia, think about xenophobia. The school leaders who are standing calmly and firmly, and the district leaders and the system leaders saying, of course, schools are places where young people should have the opportunity to learn about these issues. They are themselves playing a crucial role of allyship right now for this work to happen at all. So Tara, I think that's a great closing point. And I want to make sure, I think we've been engaging all the way along, but I want to make sure to see if there are any questions, burning questions that there are a lot more slides that we didn't get to, so I apologize for that. But any questions that anybody wants to ask as we close, and thank you, Shanoa and Emily, for helping to facilitate throughout. Any questions or critiques, final reactions on this theme of allyship and the example of Us versus Hate? Anyone? In the chat or just raising a hand if we can see it. Where do we continue this conversation? One place we can go is the School Talking Facebook group. That should be one word. Another place we can continue this conversation if you want to join the Us versus Hate community. Suzanne, can you go to slide 32? Twitter too, follow us. Oh, I know what I was supposed to do. Follow us at Us versus Hate on social media. Stick your email in the chat. That's what I wanted to do. And we will put you on our newsletter. But here, I'm just going to invite you. Oh, Tammy, you got a last word?
Yeah, we have a hand that has been raised. I just wanted to,
yes,
Marlene.
Please.
Hi, I live in a community that's 90% white, and I work with teachers who are 90% white. And I'm trying to encourage, and I'm a retired K-8 teacher, and I'm trying to encourage them to promote ethnic studies in our high school. And their position is they feel like it should be taught by people of color. And so they're very hesitant. So I'm kind of stuck.
A very deep point to raise in our last minute, and a crucial point, Marlene, about allyship. I mean, I think this is one of those core tensions that we need more faculty of color in all white districts. We also need to not wait to teach ethnic studies. but we do need more faculty of color in your district. You know what I mean? And so even as we need to do ethnic studies too in all white spaces, particularly, you know, that even 100% white school should be learning ethnic studies, right? So there are a lot of core tensions in what you just said. But I think the ally in you is the one who is continuing to ask those questions and pursue a more inclusive and historically accurate curriculum. So it's a long project that a lot of people are on. So thank you also for being on it. Looks like it's 2:30 and Marlene got our last word. So what we're gonna do is please put your chat, and Tammy, can you help me save the chat since you're the owner of this?
Absolutely. And Pamela, I see that you have your hand raised, but if you can drop your comment in the chat, then we'll hopefully be able to share it out.
Yeah, and I can stick around. And while Pamela is doing that, consider sending young people you know toward usversushate.org and toward our special call for April 8th. It's on the website, usversushate.org, and it will explain itself there. But we're asking for even more youth voice right now on the kind of teaching and learning and activity schools should do so that everybody feels like they belong.
Great. So Pamela, did you want to go ahead? Well, I want to be conscious of the time. So if we are at the end of the program and you need to leave, it is 2:31 right now, please feel free to go ahead and exit. And we thank you for joining us. Thank you for being here. And don't forget to check out some of the other workshops that we have in the hub.